In this video, we'll be discussing the process of photosynthesis. We'll also be taking a look at the organelles that are found in plants and the major structures that allow this amazing process to happen. The process of photosynthesis takes light energy from the sun, carbon dioxide, and water from the atmosphere and turns that into carbohydrates and oxygen through the process of a chemical change. The process of photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplast of all plant cells. Before we dig deeper into the process of photosynthesis, let's discuss the types of organisms that go through this process. These organisms are called autotrophs. Auto meaning self and troph meaning feeders. Autotrophs are organisms that are capable of making their own food, so they do not need to go out and absorb any other energy from any other organism. They simply take energy from the light or energy from other chemicals and transform that through a chemical process and create carbohydrates for themselves. These are the types of organisms that undergo photosynthesis. Other types of organisms, which are called heterotrophs, hetero meaning outside, troph meaning feeder. These are organisms that need to take in food from the outside. Humans are, for example, are heterotrophs because we need to consume other organisms in order to obtain energy for ourselves. Unfortunately, we can't go outside, lay in the sun, and just feel full. That would be nice though, wouldn't it? At the bottom here, we see that we have light energy, and the light energy is going to strike all autotrophs that are able to convert that light energy and turn it into carbohydrates. The way that this energy is transferred is that not only is the energy utilized for the plant itself, but any other heterotroph that comes around to eat it will also get that energy as well. There are two types of autotrophs. The first kind is a photoautotroph, which utilizes the sun's energy in order to make carbohydrates. Photo means light, so therefore the autotrophs, because they can make their own food, are utilizing it from a light source. Chemoautotrophs are organisms that are able to make their own food, but utilizing not light energy, but they're using chemical energy. Things such as methane. Bacteria that live in deep sea hot vents are considered chemoautotrophs. They do not have the source of light because they're too far down under the water, but they're able to use chemicals near deep sea hot vents such as methane and convert that energy into carbohydrates. Photosynthesis can be summarized by the following equation. 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, using the energy from sunlight to create our products, which is glucose, C6H12O6, which should be familiar to us from the carbohydrate unit of macromolecules, and 6 molecules of oxygen. So the reactants of this reaction is carbon dioxide, water, and energy from the sun, which is light energy, to form our products of 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. The carbohydrate that's produced, as said before, is glucose. Remember that this is the general formula for all monosaccharides. So we could say that it's fructose or glucose, but it is only glucose that's produced in photosynthesis. This entire process takes place in the chloroplast, and any energy that's not released as heat, which is where most energy is coming from because it's being used, broken down by the cell to do most of our daily functions. If it's not being released as heat, it's being stored in the bonds of a molecule called ATP, which is the energy molecule that drives all of our chemical reactions. It gives us the energy to do absolutely everything. It gives plants the energy to do cellular reactions, and it gives animals the energy to do cellular reactions. Without ATP, life would not exist. We'll talk a little bit more about the structure of the molecule ATP in just a little bit. There are two main stages of photosynthesis. The first stage is called the light reactions, or the light-dependent reactions. In this stage, the light energy that's absorbed from the sun is converted by splitting a molecule of water. So the energy that comes from the sun will break the bonds of the water molecule. The hydrogens will be stored temporarily in the molecule ATP, and the oxygen will be released. This is where the product of oxygen in the chemical reaction that I showed you in the slide earlier comes from. So the hydrogen is stored used as stored energy in the molecule ATP, and the oxygen is considered to be a byproduct, or a waste product. It's not needed in the cell anymore, therefore it's released out into the atmosphere. The second stage is called the Calvin cycle, or sometimes it's called the light independent reaction or the dark reaction. I like to call it the Calvin cycle so we don't get confused with the names. The Calvin cycle does not require light. The only portion of photosynthesis that requires light is the first part, and that's only just to split the molecule of water. In the second phase of photosynthesis, during the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide is used to form glucose. So again, oxygen is not needed and is considered to be a waste product. So the molecule of CO2 is also split using the energy from ATP and NADPH, which is another molecule that's used as a energy storing molecule. CO2 is split in half. The oxygen will leave just like the oxygen from water left in the light reaction, and that's where it goes into the atmosphere. And the carbon is left behind, and as you have more carbon dioxides coming together, the oxygen split away, you start to have carbons forming and bonding with each other. Once you get 6 of them, you have your backbone for the molecule of glucose. The entire process of photosynthesis takes place in an organelle that's found only in plant cells, and we call that the chloroplast. So let's take a closer look into what makes up a chloroplast. Now we've looked at chloroplasts under the microscope, and under the microscope when we did our lab, they kind of looked like little green dots. But if you look inside of a chloroplast, they have their own structures. The first structure is called a thylakoid, and a thylakoid is a very thin disc that contains the pigment chlorophyll. So if you can see here how these thylakoids have been cut open, they have an empty space in between them filled with this pigment called chlorophyll, which is this green pigment that gives plants their green color. The thylakoids are the location of the light reactions. So the thylakoid itself, the light energy will go through the chloroplast into the thylakoid, and it is inside this thylakoid membrane where the water becomes split, hydrogen is stored in the bonds of ATP, and oxygen is released. The second structure is called a granum, and a granum is just an entire stack of thylakoids. So one thylakoid is one pancake-looking structure. A granum is an entire stack of thylakoids. Next we have the stroma, and you can compare the stroma to the cytoplasm of a cell. It almost acts as the exact same thing. The only difference is that it's a jelly-like substance that's filled with enzymes that doesn't, fill the entire cell. It's only filling the empty space of the chloroplast. So it's a jelly-like substance that's filled with enzymes. This is also the location of the dark reactions, where the Calvin cycle happens. So the normal way light that we see that comes from the sun is actually, if it were to be split up, it's made of all the different colors that we know, called the visible light spectrum, or as we were taught in kindergarten, ROYGBIV. The R stands for red, we have orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And it's in that order that they are arranged due to their wavelengths. The colors that are closest towards the reds have a much lower wavelength in comparison to the colors that are closest to violet, which have a much higher wavelength. And it's the frequency and the wavelength of these colors that allow your eyes to see these different colors. They reflect off of your eyes. So a pigment is a special compound that absorbs the particular wavelengths of these lights. And not only do they absorb certain colors, but if they're absorbing a certain color, they're going to reflect the other colors. So chlorophyll, because we're talking about photosynthesis, chlorophyll likes to absorb every other color in the visible spectrum except for green, which is why when we look at plants and they're filled with chlorophyll, chlorophyll is absorbing all of those colors and reflecting green, and that's what allows us to see plants as green. So as stated before, the main chloroplast pigment is called chlorophyll, and chlorophyll absorbs all the different colors of the visible spectrum except for green, which it reflects. There are two types of chlorophyll. We have chlorophyll A, which is involved in the light reactions, and it is the main pigment found in photosynthesis. Chlorophyll B, which is a very slight molecular change. It assists in capturing the light, but is considered to be an accessory pigment. Another accessory pigment are called the carotenoids. These pigments are unable to be seen when chlorophyll is present, but during seasonal times such as autumn or fall, and the chlorophyll starts to break down and not be as present, other pigments like carotenoids are able to show. So again, they're not absorbing colors like yellow, orange, and brown. The colors that you see are the colors that are actually reflected. So whatever color you're seeing, it's absorbing everything opposite. So carotenoids absorb green, and they absorb blue, and they absorb violet and indigo, but the colors that they reflect would be yellows and reds and browns and oranges, and those are the colors that make up this fall hue. So this picture here is a zoomed in of the chloroplast. So if we look over here, this whole outer layer is the chloroplast membrane, and this gray area is the stroma, and these are the thylakoids, and this entire stack is called the grana. So in stage 1, the light reactions, the light energy from the sun comes in. We have water that's either coming from precipitation outside, or if it's a house plant, their owner is watering the plant. So this is where this water is coming from. Water comes in. The light energy will split the bonds between the hydrogen and the oxygen. The oxygen will leave and go out into the atmosphere, and the hydrogen will be stored in this molecule of ATP and NADPH, and it's just storing energy. And it goes into the stroma. Okay, so we're leaving the thylakoid, we're going into the stroma, which is our stage 2 Calvin cycle. Here we have carbon dioxide from the atmosphere coming in. We have our stored ATP, our stored NADPH, okay? We have the energy from the ATP and the NADPH breaking the bonds between the carbon and the oxygen. The oxygen will continue to leave out into the atmosphere just like it did here, and we are left with carbon, and as we continue to plug on carbons from stripped away carbon dioxides, we'll have 6 of them bonding with a couple hydrogens and some oxygens to form our glucose molecule, which is the major product of photosynthesis because this is how the plant stores its food. There are three major factors that affect photosynthesis. The first one is light intensity. If there's not a lot of light, maybe it's shady, it's raining, and the light intensity is not as much, the water that's coming in from the atmosphere from precipitation, or again, if it's an indoor plant and it's not getting a lot of light or it's in the shade, that energy is not going to be able to split the water molecule. Therefore, not as much oxygen will leave back into the atmosphere as a byproduct, and you'll also not get that hydrogen that gets stored in the ATPs or stored in the NADPH, which will cause not enough energy to make carbon dioxide. So if there's not enough light intensity, there won't be a lot of product. Second factor is carbon dioxide levels. If there's not a lot of carbon dioxide, you're not going to get glucose because that's the main chain, that's the backbone of your glucose molecule. And the third factor is temperature. As temperature begins to rise, photosynthesis rates increase until you hit a certain point, and then it starts to drop again. So it has to be at a nice normal temperature in order for photosynthesis to be at a great rate.